Welcome to The Martian by Andy Weir, a gripping survival story set on the Red Planet. Follow astronaut Mark Watney as he battles the odds, using science, wit, and sheer determination to stay alive. Let's begin. Part 1, Chapters 1 through 5. Mark Watney is an American botanist and mechanical engineer on the Ares 3 mission to Mars. After a catastrophic accident, he becomes stranded alone on the planet. Watney's account unfolds through his mission log, which he begins on the first day of his abandonment. Aware that he may not survive, he writes candidly, "I don't even know who'll read this. I guess someone will find it eventually, maybe 100 years from now." The log begins on Sol 6 of the mission. A Sol is a Martian day, slightly longer than an Earth day, equal to 24 hours, 39 minutes, and 35 seconds. Watney knows he's alone because the Mars Ascent Vehicle, MAV, is gone, which means the rest of the crew must have launched back to the Hermes, the orbiting spacecraft. In his log, he recounts the incident that left him behind. During a surface operation, a violent sandstorm forced the crew to abort their mission. As they made their way from the Mars lander habitat, the HAB, to the MAV, an antenna from the comms dish tore loose and struck Watney. It breached his suit and punctured his abdomen. He lost consciousness and was swept away by the storm. With his biomonitor destroyed, the crew saw no signs of life, no pulse, no blood pressure, no oxygen levels, and presumed him dead. Ironically, the blood from his wound sealed the suit around the antenna, saving his life. When he regains consciousness, Watney limps back to the HAB, thankfully still intact, and discovers the ruined biomonitor. He quickly realizes the crew left because they thought he was dead. With no working radio, he has no way to contact the Hermes or NASA to let them know he's still alive. After a night's rest, Watney feels more optimistic. He patches himself up, repairs his extravehicular activity or EVA suit, and begins inventorying supplies. There's enough food for a 6-person crew for 50 days, meaning it can sustain him for 300 days, or even 400 if he rations. He has 6 EVA suits, one for each crew member. Though the MAV is gone, its landing stage remains, and the Mars descent vehicle, while damaged, might still yield usable parts. He also has 2 fully functional rover vehicles, a working solar array, and operational life support systems, including the oxygenator, its backup, and the water reclaimer. All things considered, the HAB is livable. If he can find a way to grow more food and extend key resources, Watney believes he might survive until the next Mars mission, Ares 4, arrives in 4 years. His top priority? Re-establish communication with NASA or the Hermes. Since the food won't last 4 years, he devises a farming plan. Watney brought a small amount of Earth soil for experiments, which he can use to seed Martian soil with bacteria, making it fertile. He plans to fertilize it with human waste, his own, and that collected from the other crew members. In the food inventory, he finds several whole potatoes meant for a Thanksgiving meal. He decides to plant them. However, water will be an issue. He needs more, both for himself and for his crops. Even with this plan, the potatoes will only buy him about 90 extra sols, and he's still over 1,000 sols away from rescue. By Sol 25, Watney is making progress. He plans to accelerate the potato growth by raising the temperature and devotes the entire HAB to his crop. He also sets up the pop-up tents from the rovers as makeshift greenhouses. Still, water remains a problem. By Sol 30, he shifts his thinking. To get water, he needs hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen he can generate from carbon dioxide using the oxygenator. Hydrogen is trickier. He can extract it from the hydrazine fuel in the MDV, but the process is hazardous. In his downtime, Watney searches the crew's belongings for entertainment. He finds a data stick in the bunk of Commander Melissa Lewis filled with 1970s and 80s television. Not his preference, but it's all he has. He starts with Three's Company. By Sol 32, Watney maps out the risky process to create water from hydrazine. He'll need to start a fire. No small task, since everything in the HAB is designed to be fireproof. While rummaging through Rick Martinez's belongings, he finds a wooden crucifix. He uses it to make a flame. At first, everything goes smoothly. But then Watney realizes excess hydrogen has been accumulating. He's been gaining oxygen, meaning not all of the hydrogen is burning. The HAB has become a bomb. One spark, and it could all go up. He evacuates to a rover, taking an air sample. The HAB atmosphere is now 64% hydrogen. He can only stay in the rover for a short time and must act fast to make the HAB safe. His plan: remove the oxygen and wear a spacesuit inside the HAB, then burn off the hydrogen in small, controlled bursts. But removing all the oxygen could kill the bacteria in the soil, which would ruin his crops. So he moves the potato plants to the rover to keep them from freezing. Even with careful planning, there's an explosion. He spends another night in the rover, troubleshooting. Eventually, he discovers that he hadn't accounted for the oxygen he exhaled during the process. An elementary oversight with nearly fatal consequences. Fortunately, he corrects the mistake, gets the water production back on track, and re-enters the HAB. The bacteria in the soil survived, so the potatoes can still grow. On a lighter note, while stuck in the rover, Watney finds another of Commander Lewis's data sticks, this one filled with 1970s disco music. He also continues watching old shows, moving on to The Dukes of Hazzard, Part 2, Chapters 6 through 10. This part marks a shift in narrative style. Instead of Watney's mission log, it opens in third-person point of view. It is the day of Watney's memorial, 2 months after his death. At NASA, Venkat Kapoor, director of Mars operations, is in conversation with Teddy Sanders, the head of NASA. Venkat is arguing for satellite imagery of the Ares 3 HAB and its surroundings on Mars. He believes that whatever materials were left behind could be useful for future missions, and he'd like to assess what equipment survived the dust storm. Teddy, who has denied this request for the past 2 months, finally explains his reasoning to Venkat. Because NASA is a public agency, all imagery they take becomes publicly available. He fears that Watney's body may be visible and recorded by the satellite, leading to a public relations disaster. However, after some negotiation, Teddy agrees to approve satellite imagery of the Ares 3 mission site on Mars. Mindy Park, a satellite communications officer at NASA, is assigned to analyze the satellite imagery. After comparing several images taken at different times, she realizes that the rover pop-up tents have been deployed, something not documented in the mission log. Additionally, the solar cells have been cleaned. These facts, combined with the absence of Watney's body, point to only one conclusion. Realizing that Watney is alive, she contacts Venkat Kapoor. After discussion, Annie Montrose, director of NASA Media Relations, announces to the public that Watney is alive. From this point forward, media coverage becomes constant and pervasive. NASA immediately meets with Jet Propulsion Laboratories, JPL, the company that designs and manufactures spacecraft and equipment for NASA, to figure out how to communicate with Watney. We now return to Watney's mission logs, and from now on, the narrative will alternate between his epistolary entries and conventional third-person narration. While Earth has discovered Watney is alive and is working to contact him, Watney remains unaware. He is making steady progress, and life on Mars is relatively stable as he harvests his first potato crop. As with his first planting, he cuts the potatoes into chunks and replants them for a second, larger harvest. He is also continuing to pursue his other priority, gaining communication with NASA. His plan involves traveling to the Ares 4 MAV, which was pre-deployed to Mars in preparation for the next mission, and is located 3,200 kilometers away. This plan presents several logistical problems: how to live in the rover while traveling, how to charge the rover, and how to provide himself with heat, water, and oxygen during the journey. He begins modifying the rover and takes several short drives to test his system. To heat the rover, he decides to dig up and use the extremely dangerous radioisotope thermoelectric generator, RTG, as a heat source. This plutonium-based device, originally used by the mission, had been buried due to its danger. He successfully excavates the RTG and installs it in the rover. He prepares for his longest test drive yet, 20 days. Back on Earth, NASA tracks Watney's movements day by day by observing the changing positions of the rover and other equipment. Mindy Park has been given oversight of the relevant Mars satellites to ensure near-continuous coverage. During a meeting with Teddy, Venkat, Annie Montrose, Mitch Henderson, flight director for Ares 3, Bruce Engs, director of JPL, and Mindy, the decision is made not to inform the Hermes crew that Watney is alive. The reasoning is that the crew still has a mission to complete, and knowing they left Watney behind would be more demoralizing than believing he had died. For the crew to function effectively, they can't know he survived. Mitch strongly opposes this decision, but he is overruled. Additionally, after a discussion with Bruce, they decide to send the Ares 4 supply probe early, stocked with provisions to sustain Watney until the Ares 4 mission arrives. Meanwhile, Venkat and Mindy, observing Watney's test drives and his departure on the longest one, deduce that he is headed to Pathfinder, an American robotic spacecraft that landed on Mars years ago. They suspect his goal is to use Pathfinder's radio system to contact NASA. Venkat contacts Bruce at JPL and asks him to gather the original Pathfinder team to assess the situation and determine how to establish communication with Watney. In a short segment, Dr. Irene Shields appears on CNN to speak about Watney. She is the flight psychologist for the Ares missions and describes Watney as good-natured, cheerful, resourceful, and a capable problem solver. However, she notes that they cannot know his current mental state. It is Sol 83, and Watney, still unaware of the activity on Earth, is en route to Pathfinder. The trip is going smoothly, but he lacks a map or a way to navigate. There are no landmarks, and he can't use a compass because Mars has no magnetic field. So, he navigates by the stars. Phobos, the larger of Mars's 2 moons, crosses the sky from west to east twice a day, and he uses its position to orient himself. The drive continues uneventfully until he gets close enough to Pathfinder to find a usable landmark, a small, unnamed crater. He names it the Lighthouse of Alexandria. He finds Pathfinder and, with it, Sojourner, its robotic rover. Both are intact. He removes the components needed for communication and takes Sojourner for parts. By the end of the chapter, he has successfully loaded everything into the rover and plans to return to the Ares 3 hab the next day. On the return trip, he is able to follow his own tracks thanks to clear weather. When wind erases his path, he switches back to navigating by Phobos. During the journey, as a side project, he collects rock and soil samples during each EVA. This isn't part of his role as the crew botanist, but he enjoys the science and finds it relaxing. He also hopes that a future mission might use his data. During charging breaks and at night, he watches Million Dollar Man from Lewis's data stick and notes its surprisingly accurate scientific content. When he finally returns to the hab after 3 weeks, everything is still functioning and the potatoes are still growing. He begins repairing the Sojourner rover and charging Pathfinder. He reflects that even if Pathfinder powers up, no one at JPL will be listening anymore, though he is, of course, wrong. The chapter closes with an independent log entry from Pathfinder on Sol 0, confirming it has charged and is broadcasting, attempting to connect with Earth, and finally, that a signal has been acquired. Part 3, Chapters 11 through 14. Back on Earth, JPL receives the Pathfinder signal. While Watney has been traveling, they have been building a control center that uses the Deep Space Network to connect to the old Pathfinder system. The camera on Pathfinder is functional, and Watney knows this because when JPL connects to Pathfinder, he sees the antenna move to acquire the signal. For the first time, when the antenna moves, Watney knows that NASA and JPL are aware he is alive. At this point, he has been stranded on Mars for 3 months. It is Sol 97. Because NASA is using the camera to communicate, he can write messages and send pictures to them, but they have no way to respond. Watney devises a quick and crude system by asking yes, no questions, and they point the camera at a sign labeled yes or no. From there, he develops the system further to incorporate ASCI, a code to convey letters, numbers, and symbols. He draws cards and holds them up to the camera, and the camera points to different cards to spell out messages. However, this doesn't solve the issue of transmission time, which takes about half an hour per message. When Annie Montrose asks Watney for a picture of himself for media use, he poses like the Fonz from Happy Days. At JPL, they devise a way to update Pathfinder's operating system so it can interface with the Ares 3 rover, enabling real-time, minute-by-minute communication. The plan involves Watney hacking the rover and modifying some code. He does so successfully and begins direct communication with Earth. He and Venkat finally share their first detailed exchange, during which Watney is angry to learn the Ares 3 crew still believes he is dead. This time, Henderson receives permission from Teddy to inform the crew that Watney is alive. This chapter includes the first flashback to the accident that left Watney stranded, Although readers already know the basic details from Watney's perspective, this is the first time the story shows the event from a third-person view and reveals the full picture. It is also the first time the reader meets Commander Melissa Lewis and the rest of the crew, Major Rick Martinez, Dr. Chris Beck, Alex Vogel, and Beth Johansson. On the morning of the incident, the crew is going about their routine tasks when they learn a severe storm is approaching. They gather in the hab and monitor the wind, which climbs to 100, then 125 kilometers per hour. If winds exceed 150 kilometers per hour, they must abort the mission, enter the MAV, and return to Hermes. Their mission would be over, but incomplete. Eventually, Commander Lewis makes the call to abort, and the crew begins heading through the storm toward the MAV. While traveling with the group, Watney is struck by debris, an antenna from the communications dish. It knocks him off his feet, and he is lost in the storm. The crew waits as long as possible, with Lewis searching the area on foot, until the MAV becomes unstable and they are forced to leave. Because the antenna pierced his biomonitor, they believe Watney is dead. Throughout this chapter, Watney's mission log is interspersed with italicized sections, focusing on a particular segment of hab canvas. These passages detail the manufacturing of the fabric and its earlier installation into the hab's airlock by Lewis and Beck. Although their significance is initially unclear, the importance of this material soon becomes evident. Watney is now receiving data dumps and has gotten several noteworthy emails. One message from his alma mater, the University of Chicago, tells him that because he has grown crops, he has technically colonized Mars. Another message from NASA informs him that they are developing a new plan for the Ares 4 crew to pick him up using their MDV en route to the Ares 4 site. Watney also receives his first message from Commander Lewis aboard Hermes, and a communication from Venkat stating that there will be an investigation into the accident to determine whether anything could have been done differently to save him. Watney is also growing frustrated with NASA. Now that they are in contact, they are attempting to micromanage his every move, even though he was specifically chosen for his independence and problem-solving abilities. One example is the malfunctioning water reclaimer. NASA won't let him fix it until they come up with a solution, but he is confident he knows the issue. Staying true to his character, he disassembles the water reclaimer and, because his diagnosis is correct, successfully repairs it. As Watney prepares for his second potato harvest, a sandstorm strikes and damages the hab. The airlock, with Watney inside, is torn away due to the failure of the small piece of fabric highlighted in the earlier italicized sections. The hab deflates, the airlock has a leak, and his faceplate is broken. Suddenly, despite everything having gone well, he is again in life-threatening danger. This chapter briefly shifts to an audio log transcript as Watney dictates from inside the airlock. There is a small leak he can't locate. Feeling hopeless, he throws a tantrum, then calms down and resumes problem-solving. He finds the leak by shaving some arm hair, lighting it, generating static with plastic, and touching it with a metal tool. Before doing so, he grimly notes that this method is similar to how the Apollo 1 crew died. He eventually patches the leak with duct tape and, through a series of maneuvers, rolls the airlock close enough to reach the deflated hab. Taking a risk with his damaged helmet, he dashes into the hab, retrieves Martinez's helmet, and returns to the rover. With the immediate danger over, he surveys the hab. The soil for his crops has frozen, killing the bacteria essential for growing food. The potatoes he was about to harvest are also frozen and dead. Once again, Watney faces the critical problem of how to feed himself long enough to survive until the Ares 4 MDV arrives. He may starve before help can reach him. Part 4, Chapters 15 through 18. Watney and NASA communicate about the airlock incident. Now that the farm has been destroyed, plans for the Ares 4 resupply probe are being accelerated. NASA and JPL focus on modifying the probe as quickly as possible to send food to Watney. JPL begins working overtime on the probe, named Iris. Meanwhile, Rich Purnell is introduced for the first time. He is a physicist who calculates course corrections, and he is tasked with plotting Iris's trajectory to Mars. But while working on this assignment, he develops an idea and quietly begins working on a new plan, one the reader won't learn about until the next chapter. To meet the deadline for the Iris launch, Teddy Sanders decides to skip the standard inspection protocols. The The chances of an issue arising during inspection are slim, about 1 in 40, or 2.5%. While that level of risk would normally justify stopping a countdown, Teddy accepts it as necessary. Thanks to this decision, Iris is launched on time. However, during flight, the probe develops a shimmy. While normally harmless, this movement causes the protein cubes intended for Watney to shift inside the probe. Had they had time for proper testing, this issue would have been identified. The shimmy leads to an imbalance in the payload, and ultimately the probe is destroyed in flight. The Iris mission fails, and NASA must come up with a new solution. It seems like all hope is lost. Watney begins composing letters to each member of the Ares 3 crew, assuring them that none of this is their fault and they should not feel guilty. In his letter to Rick Martinez, he asks Rick to check on his parents if he doesn't make it. However, he ends the letter by making it clear that he is not giving up. He's simply planning ahead. In China, Zhu Tao, the underdirector of the China National Space Administration, meets with director Guo Ming. They have a booster on one of their probes that, with a lighter payload, could reach Mars. After discussion, they agree to offer the probe to NASA in exchange for a Chinese astronaut participating in the Ares 5 mission. Teddy Sanders accepts their offer and gives JPL a new challenge: get the booster and payload ready in just 28 days, less than half the time they had for Iris. Rich Purnell, having developed his idea, shares it with Venkat. They meet with NASA and JPL to present his plan. He proposes that Hermes could perform a gravity assist maneuver when it reaches Earth, then slingshot back to Mars to retrieve Watney. The Chinese probe could intercept Hermes as it passes Earth to deliver supplies. After reviewing the plan, Teddy rejects it, judging the risk too high. He's unwilling to endanger the entire Hermes crew, along with Watney. Mitch Henderson disagrees and secretly sends the plan to the Ares 3 crew aboard Hermes. The crew holds a meeting and unanimously agrees to execute the plan, which they name the Rich Purnell Maneuver. They notify NASA and deliberately change course. Watney receives the message that Hermes is returning to Mars to rescue him. His top priority becomes reaching the Ares 4 MAV, which he will use to launch and intercept Hermes in orbit. Since Hermes can't land, Watney must rendezvous in space. He has 257 sols to prepare. Step 1. Prepare for the rover trip to the Ares 4 MAV. Working with NASA, he begins designing a vehicle capable of making the journey. Because this trip is significantly longer than the one to Pathfinder, he can't rely on the same systems. The new vehicle will involve combining both rovers and making extensive modifications. He must fit what he calls the Big Three: the atmospheric regulator, the oxygenator, and the water reclaimer into the rover, along with space for himself. He estimates the trip will take about 50 sols. One day, while working on the modifications that he and NASA have designed, Watney's drill creates a metal-to-metal connection with his workbench, sending a surge of electricity through Pathfinder and destroying its electronics. With Pathfinder now inoperable, Watney loses his ability to communicate with NASA. He won't be able to fully re-establish contact until he reaches the Ares 4 MAV. With communications down, Watney must continue building and preparing the vehicle without help from NASA. He also must make the journey on his own. He faces several design decisions, but one thing is clear: he has to reduce weight. Watney returns to independent problem solving. He decides to use the RTG to power the regulator, but that requires digging it up again. In the process, he seriously injures his back. Instead of pushing through, he rigs up a hot bath for himself and spends a week resting and healing. During this time, he reflects and comes up with a new idea. If he brings more solar panels and additional batteries, he'll be able to generate and store more energy, increasing the odds of reaching the Ares 4 MAV on time. Though he can still send crude messages using Morse code by arranging rocks visible via satellite, Watney is essentially isolated. One day, he realizes the Chinese probe is launching in just 2 days to intercept Hermes. If the launch fails, the entire rescue plan will be canceled, and yet, he won't know the outcome until he reaches the communication systems at the Ares 4 MAV. Part 5, Chapters 19 through 22. Aboard Hermes, each crew member takes advantage of their proximity to Earth to contact their loved ones. By accepting this new mission, they have voluntarily extended their time in space by an additional 533 days. more than a year and a half, during which anything could go wrong. Each crew member has a heartfelt conversation with family, explaining their decision. It is clear that each of them is making a personal sacrifice. Martinez will miss more of his son's early childhood. Vogel's mother is in declining health, and he may not make it home in time to see her again. Johansson shares with her father the crew's grim contingency plan in case the resupply mission fails. The others will take a suicide pill, allowing her, as the smallest and most efficient crew member, to survive on existing supplies, possibly even resorting to cannibalism. Meanwhile, on Earth, Teddy and Venkat travel to China to observe and participate in the launch of the resupply probe. The launch is a success, and the probe docks with Hermes. The ship is now officially on its return course to Mars. Watney, for his part, is completely engaged in preparing for the journey. He has figured out how to use the RTG to supply heat and to power the atmospheric regulator. Additionally, he decides to build a small attached tent using HAB canvas so he can step outside the rover and relax while the solar cells charge. He runs tests on all his equipment and inventories his supplies. It is Sol 390, and his departure is scheduled for Sol 449. He continues to review every detail, testing and inspecting right up until it's time to begin packing. In a humorous moment, Watney realizes that under international treaty law, Mars technically qualifies as international waters, since he will not be in radio contact with NASA until he reaches the Ares 4 MAV. He cannot get official permission to board it. That means, legally speaking, he's taking control of another nation's spacecraft without consent, making him, by definition, a pirate. A space pirate. As Watney begins packing, Mindy continues monitoring his movements and decoding his Morse code messages, reporting back to Venkat. Everything seems to be on track until a new complication arises. At a NASA meeting, a scientist reports that a dust storm is forming on Mars. Though it won't be strong enough to impede Watney's driving, it will gradually reduce solar input, meaning his panels will take longer and longer to charge. Eventually, charging will take 5 times longer than normal, enough of a delay that Watney could miss the Hermes intercept window. Because of the communication breakdown, NASA cannot warn Watney. Once the storm fully develops, they will also lose visual tracking of him via satellite. All they can do is hope that Watney detects the problem on his own and adjusts his course accordingly. Meanwhile, aboard Hermes, the crew continues troubleshooting to keep their ship operational, as it's now been in space far beyond its intended lifespan. On Sol 449, Watney finishes cooking all the potatoes he'll need for the trip. He runs final diagnostics and powers down the HAB for the last time. As he prepares to leave, he has a quiet moment of reflection, realizing the HAB had become his home. He brushes aside the emotion and focuses on the task ahead. As the next chapter opens, it is Sol 458, and Watney has been traveling for 10 sols. He has reached Morth Vallis, the first major milestone of his journey. His routine is straightforward. He drives for 4 sols, then takes an air day on the 5th, during which he re-oxygenates the rover. So far, the journey has gone well. To navigate, Watney has crafted a sextant based on 16th century technology to determine latitude. For longitude, he again relies on Phobos, as he did during the Pathfinder trip. His altitude has increased, and the once flat terrain now requires detours around craters and rocks, making his navigation skills critical. Back on Earth, NASA, the media, and the world watch anxiously as Watney unknowingly approaches the dust storm. If he realizes too late, there may be no way to reroute in time. Watney begins to notice the solar cells are taking longer to charge, but he chalks it up to degradation from use. It's only when he stops to replot his course at Marth Crater and performs an EVA that he recognizes something is wrong. He sees a haze in the sky and combines that observation with the reduced charging efficiency, finally concluding that he's in a dust storm. Watney sends this information to NASA via Morse code, and Mindy relays the update. He has successfully diagnosed the threat on his own, but whether he can overcome it remains to be seen. Part 6, Chapters 23 through 26. To solve the dust storm problem, Watney needs to determine its size and direction. He decides to take the rover on a loop around the nearby area, leaving behind a solar cell every 40 kilometers. With each solar cell, he places one of the cameras salvaged from a spare EVA suit. The next day, he drives the same route in reverse to collect them, measuring each panel's wattage to identify how deep it is into the storm and where the storm is most intense. Using this data, he begins planning a new route to avoid the storm while still staying on track to reach the Ares 4 MAV in time. After retrieving the solar cells, he realizes that the optimal path to bypass the storm is southeast, off course from his original route and past his scheduled arrival on Sol 494. However, since the Hermes flyby isn't until Sol 549, he still has a buffer. He travels 540 kilometers due south, successfully avoiding the storm. With power regeneration now back at 100%, he resumes direct travel to the Schiaparelli crater, where the MAV is located. He calculates his new arrival for Sol 498 and feels a genuine sense of hope. He believes he might actually make it, but later that day he unknowingly drives off an invisible ridge. The rover rolls, and his entire rig comes apart. Fortunately, Watney is unharmed, and while his equipment is scattered, most of it remains intact. He sends a message to Earth explaining what happened and confirming that he's okay. Then, he gets to work righting the rover and trailer. The regulator and oxygenator are operational, but he has lost 3 solar cells. In the end, the accident costs him 4 sols, and he is still 220 kilometers from the MAV. He decides to slow down to avoid another accident, even though it will take more time. Safety is now the top priority. The rest of the trip proceeds without incident. As he nears the Ares 4 MAV, he begins picking up the MAV's beacon signal. The narrative shifts from Watney's mission log to a third-person perspective. The astronaut is seen arriving at the MAV site, celebrating his arrival and entering the airlock of the MAV's landing stage. Once Watney arrives, he performs a full system diagnostic. He re-establishes contact with NASA and JPL and learns the plan for modifying the Ares 4 MAV. On Earth, Bruce Ung briefs Venkat on the extreme modifications required for the launch. These include removing all life support and controls, allowing Martinez to pilot the MAV remotely from Hermes. Watney must also remove auxiliary power systems, backup communications, and even physical components like the nose airlock, windows, and hull panels. He'll cover the exposed front with HAB canvas, using it as a tarp. Watney is stunned by the plan but follows through. He also prepares rocket fuel by electrolyzing water into hydrogen, which the fuel plant then converts into fuel. This process also includes electrolyzing his urine. Despite his skepticism, Watney completes the modifications and final preparations. Everything is ready. It's Sol 549, and Watney is inside the Ares 4 MAV, awaiting launch to rendezvous with the Hermes. The entire world watches. On Hermes, the crew is standing by. Beck will perform an EVA to retrieve Watney. Despite orders from Commander Lewis to remain tethered, Beck quietly tells Vogel that if needed, he should release Beck's tether so he can reach Watney, even though it means risking his own life. The Ares 4 MAV launches with Watney aboard, subjected to more G-force than any human in the history of space travel. He sees the HAB canvas flapping on the nose of the MAV, but the acceleration is so intense that he can't focus. He eventually passes out. The Hermes cannot contact him. On board Hermes, the crew realizes Watney's launch velocity is slightly too low. Although the intercept trajectory is functional, the MAV will be 68 kilometers away, too far to retrieve him. They manage to solve the distance problem, but then discover they'll be going too fast to safely catch him. NASA sees the dilemma, but cannot intervene. Watney regains consciousness, and the Hermes crew informs him of the situation. To solve it, they decide to breach their own ship to generate thrust by detonating a small bomb, an extremely risky maneuver that could destroy the ship. The entire world watches in suspense. Miraculously, the plan works even better than expected. Beck performs the EVA, intercepts the MAV, and pulls Watney out. Together, they return to the Hermes airlock. The final entry in Watney's mission log is dated Mission Day 687. He is now officially a crew member of the Hermes once again, a reminder of how long this journey has lasted, and how much longer remains before they return to Earth. Watney is safe aboard the Hermes. And that's it for The Martian by Andy Weir. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on what you would like to see next. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.